What up, y'all? Welcome to the show. It's your doggy, the lo-fi horror guy, as if you didn't know. And as if you didn't know, we are in the lo-fi horror layer. This is just kind of, the starting feature of some, I've got art to slap up here. I've got some signatures to post over here. I got, some prints to slap there. I got, whatever it may be. I've got some stuff slapping. And it's going to be all for you fine ladies and gentlemen. Today, my video is going to be another inspiration by the one and only Fear Scale. Recently had just made the comment of, what are scenes that have lasted with you over the years? What are things that are just burned in your memory that you will never just be able to forget? Or if you think of, certain parts to a movie and you're like, oh my God, that part was wild. Just those types of things. So without further ado, I got a couple of movies that I do have the physical versions of. I have a couple of movies that I do not. And so I'll just name the movie and then the particular scene. There will be spoilers, so do not watch this if you haven't seen any of these movies underneath. I'm going to be going over Signs, Ransom, 8mm, The Shining, Bone Tomahawk, House on Haunted Hill, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, Jaws, and Mad Max Beyond the Thunderdome. So if you haven't seen any of these movies, do not continue watching this. All right, without further ado, the very first movie that we're going to go over is Signs. I obviously own this. I love it. Very good movie from M. Night Shyamalan. The particular scene that I am going to feature in this is the scene where they are saying that they have live footage. They have live footage of an alien in I think Mexico it was, and the little kids yelling. It's at a birthday party and they're hooting and hollering and pointing and it's behind, he's saying something to the effect, and so it kind of zooms in and then all of a sudden you're like paying attention, you're like not seeing nothing, and this alien just goes by. When I first saw that, I had, even right now talking about this, I'm getting goosebumps. The hairs on my arms and legs were just standing up. It wasn't an absolute, terrifying, but it was one of those moments where you weren't expecting it, and it definitely stood out in my memory to be featured on this list. So, very first movie I am going to slap on this list is M. Night Shyamalan's Signs. The second movie I am going to feature on here is Ransom. It's not to say necessarily certain parts, because there's this part where the kid is held ransom from Mel Gibson, his son, and gets held into this room and basically is blindfolded and gagged, I think, or mouth taped shut, and he's in this really dark room with just this pounding, pummeling music going. And I have suffered from migraines pretty much my whole life, or not suffered, I've had migraines my whole life, and just thinking of that scene and thinking of myself being in that situation, it is terrifying. It was disgusting. It was just a rough scene to watch, and always sticks in my mind. Not necessarily a horror movie, but the scenes with the poor child being held captive in that room by those, we'll say, jerks, forever stays ingrained in the old lo-fi memory, which isn't very much, but we're working on it. We're working on it. We're working on it. Okay, movie number 3, we're going with 8mm. 8mm with Nicolas Cage. It's been some years since I've seen it, and this is another feature where I'll say throughout the movie they get a hold of this tape, and it's like this serial killer, murderer, or whatever that's making these snuff films. The scenes that are these snuff films that they made for the movie are just disgusting, and is another thing that I wanted to feature on here, because I always liked the movie, but I kind of had a hard time going back and watching it, because I remember the first time I was at a friend's house, we were watching it with his parents, and it was just it was rough to sit through. You know, I kind of was like, this is uncomfortable. But the movie overall was a good movie. It was, you know, very disturbing in the sense of somebody, you know, having having family, having friends, having somebody that fell victim to something like that. That movie was very disturbing, and those scenes definitely click in the old mind. The fourth movie I am going to mention is The Shining. The Shining, boom, obviously I've got this. I've already featured this on here, so I'm not going over it. The Shining, I've got my Shelley Duvall, Wendy Torrance pop, very nice. I can't do that for Shelley Duvall, she's gross in that movie. Anyway, the movie, for me, there was many parts that stuck out. You know, you've got the kids, you've got, you know, the lady in the room 237 or whatever it is. You know, you have certain parts that kind of, you know, pop out, or the blood coming out of the elevators. But for me, the thing that always stuck in the back of my mind after every time that I viewed this movie, that is just like, what the like that tape, just like a what the farts is going on, is the scene where Shelley Duvall's going up the stairs and all of a sudden comes to the open door, and the person in the bear costume, you know, sits back and looks, and you know, he's got like the butt flap of the costume open, and all of a sudden, like, you know, he's at the legs of this, you know, high-end company owner looking type dude, and then the guy, you know, sits up and, you know, laying in bed, and he looks over and they both, you know, stare at her. I just remember seeing that the first time, and I remember being so young that I didn't really even understand what was going on. And then when I watched the movie, you know, again and again, and I did figure out, like, oh, that's gross, you know, very disgusting and disturbing moment for sure in The Shining for me. And my mention for this movie, for my scenes of horror that will never come out of the old lo-fi's head. Next, I am going to go over S. Craig Zahler's Bone Tomahawk. I have seen it more than once. I have now watched all of his movies, Bone Tomahawk, Dragged Across Concrete, and Brawl in Cell Block 99. And Bone Tomahawk for sure. The scene when the guy gets scalped and then they stuff his hair and his skin in his mouth to shut him up. They turn him upside down and they start hacking at, like, his nuts pretty much, start hacking and punching, you know, and Kurt Russell is telling him, you know, you will be avenged, you will be avenged. The whole scene with and I've gone over this before, but the scene in general is just, it's freaking nasty. And it hurts my stomach every time, to where I want to love the movie, and I do love the movie, but it limits me from watching, especially with this scene in particular, because I'm just like, oh my God. And, you know, and it makes you inspired to want to, you know, root even more for the protagonist, which I think is the whole idea. But still, the way, the effect, and the way that old boy S. Craig Zahler put that whole scene together, just with the murder and then the dialogue between the old fella and Kurt Russell, and, you know, him acting like they had a backup plan, and then, you know, it was just, that whole scene is really, really rough to watch for me. And that's going to be my feature for Bone Tomahawk. Now, next is a movie I'm a little surprised that I don't have a physical copy of. I don't know what happened to it. I know that I bought it at some point. I'm not really sure where it went. Maybe I sold it over the years and, you know, got something else cool. I hope that's the story. We'll just say that that's the story. I got something really, really sweet in return. Like this VHS of Demons 2. Whatever. Anyway, House on Haunted Hill. Very cool movie. I think this was like 1999 it was released. One of my favorites of the 90s for sure that came out. I absolutely loved the movie. I loved the kind of stop motion imagery that was in there that was very creepy, very unsettling. The scene in particular that I want to mention, to make my honorable mention on here, is the scene with Bridget Wilson. What is her name? Bridget Wilson Sampras, I think. Bridget Wilson Sampras. Correct me if I am incorrect, but she has the camcorder, and she's, you know, walking around, and, you know, she's filming and whatnot, and she goes and she comes over by this operating table, and you know, she sees it, but then she pulls up her camera, and there's the people, the people there, the doctor, you know, operating and doing performing surgery, and the person like shaking and, you know, and doing all this, and then all of a sudden they all stop, and, you know, they all just like look over, you know, toward at her. And she freaks out, and I think she ends up running and drops her camera or something. And then in the meantime, she goes to pick it up, and this one monster's like all the way at the end of the hall. And then all of a sudden, in like two flashes, it's right in your face, screaming. And, you know, that scene was really, really cool, really effective to me. You know, one of those moments like, oh my, you know, kind of like a, you know, kind of like a, who was I, like, you know, one of those types of deals. But House on Haunted Hill was definitely going to be a mention for this list here. Next, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, Tobe Hooper, 1974. Tobe Hooper wanted a PG release for this because Jaws got a PG release for their movie. And Tobe Hooper thought, well, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre should have one too. Incorrect, sir. The scene in particular, there's a couple of them, of course, because that movie is messed up. But the scene in particular is the scene when the first first man goes into the house, and he's, you know, calling, looking around for somebody, and he stumbles up the little ramp there up to the door, and all of a sudden Leatherface is there, you know, and you see him in all his might, and he's got that mallet, and smashes him in the head, and he falls, and all of a sudden he starts seizing. You know, his legs are kicking, and he like pulls him back into the room and slams it. That scene for sure had me shaking. Next is a movie that I forgot to mention in the beginning of this, which is The Exorcist. So let me mucho de loco. The Exorcist. I don't know if I've even featured this in any of my videos. William Peter Blatty. William Friedkin was the director of this. This is my, what is this? Warner Brothers with the cardboard. Cool little disc. I like the chapter insert there. And it says on the cover, back art, sure, cover, the version you've never seen. But The Exorcist, of course, has a ton of scary stuff. This is, you know, has to be in the top scariest movies of all time that I've seen. I have kind of a two-way tie for this, because when I first watched it, the two things that stood out to me the most were the scene where she comes down upside down, crawling down the stairs. Oh, just had me shaking. It was disgusting. The priest is in there, and he's doing his own, you know, little deal, and then all of a sudden you see on the screen, you see the imagery of Captain Howdy, you know, floating and transparent, you know, as if like a ghostly like spirit, and you just barely see it. But my God, when I saw that, those two scenes in particular, I was just like, okay, you know, if I had cards or paper or coffee or food, I would have thrown it in the air and been like, all right, see you later. I'd have grabbed my glasses and my hat and, you know, okay, sayonara, you know, those types of deals. But those two scenes definitely have stuck with me in horror, and The Exorcist is just creepy in general, is scary in general. So you can't really boil it down, but if I could, those two scenes are definitely my honorable mentions for that movie. So I've got two more. Steven Spielberg, of course, Jaws. I just went over that. I'm not going to show it off. Nothing special to show off. Jaws, of course, is probably top 3, going back and forth sometimes, favorite horror movies of all time. And for a good reason. I could even say Jaws is one of my favorite movies of all time. I absolutely love the movie. But you know, it to the point has terrified me from getting in water, you know, my whole life. Even going in lakes, not even oceans, going in lakes, going in pools. If I'm not feeling under my feet, I'm looking around me, you know, just kind of doing one of these deals. I am not trusting a thing. If you are a fish, if you are a piece of garbage, if you are a sea anemone, you are going to be my enemy, and I will end you if you touch me and I'm in water. But the particular scenes with Jaws is going to be obviously the opening scene, when old girl gets pulled under and she comes back up and she's striving for air and you know, doing all that deal, and then she gets pulled under again and she's going back and forth and getting, it was terrifying. And I was like probably 6 years old when I first watched this, and it was a horrifying thing to see, that scene, and then her ultimate demise, you know. And then the scene later on in the movie, obviously the notable, probably most famous scene in the movie, is when he's throwing out the chum, and the shark comes up, you know, right in your face, and you're like, oh my God, you're gonna need a bigger boat type, you know, that whole thing. Obviously everybody knows that, but my between the opening scene and the end scene where Quint faces his demise and gets, you know, the sink is capsizing, is sinking, or I'm sorry, the ship is sinking, and then he ends up falling, and the shark's just sitting there waiting, all of a sudden chomps down in him, and the blood curdling yell that he lets out is devastating. You know, it's one of those things where, you know, at the same time you feel bad because you're like, oh my God, that's gotta hurt. That's, you know, that's a situation I'd never want to be in. That's a death that I would never want to have to face. But then you also hear the emotion out of him yelling and screaming to where you're like, oh my God, like this is such a bummer. Like he went out to kill the shark. Like he was the cocky, you know, confident one that he was going to go and he was going to make sure that he was going to slap this thing and have it for dinner next week. And it turned out that he faced his demise from ye old Bruce, sadly. I'm having a brain fart. I'm almost positive it's Quint. And if I am not positive, then I'm not positive. Okay, so last but not least, my last mention is going to be Mad Max Beyond the Thunderdome. Now, this is not a horror movie. There's a lot of elements in it that are kind of creepy, that are scary in a sense, you can say. But to say it's a horror movie, no. Now, the scene that sticks out to me the most in this movie, that pops in my head and will probably never leave, is there is the character in the movie which is Master Blaster. And Master is the small dwarf man that sits on top of this huge, beastly, I can't even puff myself up big enough to describe Blaster. And there's a scene that Master is getting lowered into this pit of pigs, and it is just... the way that he is yelling and pleading for them not to do it, and you know the way that he's yelling and pleading for them not to lower him down into these pigs that are gonna just, you know, that are gonna eat him alive and have nothing left of him. It is just a sad, sickening moment in cinema in general, and forever scarred me. It very much bothered me. It very much put a lasting imprint on your doggy, the lo-fi horror guy. Without further ado, that is my list of scenes in movies that have just touched my heart and blasted out a fart, if you know what I'm saying. Go ahead and give your doggy a fist bump. Let your doggy know maybe in the comments, send me a message on Instagram, the Lo-Fi Horror Guy with underscores under every word, and let me know what are scenes in horror movies that just make you shake your head and say, no, this isn't ever going to leave out of my head for the rest of my life. Let me know. You know, I gave you a couple of movies. Maybe I can inspire a couple of things to pop up in your head. You never know. Give me a ding, give me a dong, give me a bing, give me a bong, give me a like, give me a share. If you don't, I do not care. At the end of the day, I just want to share, you know, my collectibles today. Why not? You know, I just want to share some creepy scenes that maybe you haven't thought of and you tried to sleep off for years and years, and now I just brought them back into your head and you got to relive this whole terrible history again. In the meantime, I'm slapping you with the old 3, 2, 1.
Nice.